This is episode number 38, featuring artist Bill Davidson. Welcome to the PleinAir Podcast from PleinAir Magazine. I'm your host, Eric Rhoads, publisher and founder of PleinAir Magazine. In the PleinAir Podcast, we dive deeply into the world of outdoor painting called PleinAir painting. For those of you who don't know, plein air is a French term essentially meaning outdoors, and it has come to mean painting outdoors. The French say plein air, others say plain air, but no matter how you say it, it's a big movement of people around the world going outside to paint. This show is all about the movement, the painters, the collectors, the galleries, and the art. This week's podcast is once again brought to you by the world famous, the largest plein air gathering in the world, the PleinAir Convention, coming up this April in San Diego. You can learn more at pleinairconvention.com. It's an amazing event. It's my desire to see more people fall in love with plein air painting, and you can help by sharing this episode with your friends. And if you have feedback, email me, Eric at pleinairmagazine.com. The interview is also brought to you by the PleinAir Salon Art Competition, a chance to win cash prizes, national exposure, your image, your painting on the cover of a national magazine, PleinAir Magazine. Learn more at pleinairsalon.com. Get your entry in soon because the national annual competition is about to come to an end. You want to make sure you get your best paintings in there. All right, well, let's get right to our interview with Bill Davidson. Hey, we're pleased to have Bill Davidson on the line. Bill, how are you today?
Great. Thank you very much.
So how is it that a former trial lawyer becomes a brilliant landscape artist?
Well, I'd love to say brilliant, but I don't know if I'm at that point. But it was one of those things where it was time to change my life, and art seemed to be the way to go. So it was, it held more meaning for me, and it was turning out to be very pleasurable. And I just had to work my way through the steps to make the conversion over.
Okay, so I'm going to go back to that for just a second. So you made your living for how long as a trial attorney?
20-something years.
And why did you want to change your life?
Well, I had reached a state of boredom, stagnation, and it had lost its meaning to me. And I began to get actively involved. I'd been looking at art for a while and going around, and I was looking for something else to give me more meaning to my life and to give me more meaning and more pleasure. I guess I had done enough of the law to where I was here's an odd thing. At some point in time, it became more about money than about really the internal things that I originally got into law for.
Right. So how did this journey then go from all of a sudden you made a transition? I can't imagine you would have gone cold turkey. You were probably making a great living. You had your own firm, right?
Right. Yeah, I don't, and I actually read books that said, go ahead and, jump, the sooner the better. And then, of course, if you read that book by Joseph Campbell, The Power of Myth, his thing is always follow your bliss. But no, I think it was more about if I had jumped too soon, I would have been in the studio scared to death, not knowing how to paint. So it became a process of 1 foot here, 1 foot there, until I was able to actually felt competent enough to where when I got out, I wouldn't be scared to death standing in the studio without any competency to express the voice I wanted to express.
I'm gonna dig into this process. I know a little bit about it because you and I have talked before about this, but I think that the first thing that you did was, first off, it was a pretty smart thing to do. I teach in my art marketing boot camp sessions. I have one, How to Quit Your Dirty, Rotten, Stinking Job and Become a Successful Full-Time Artist. And the process really is, don't quit your job. Figure out how to get your painting career in order, get some paintings to the point where they're starting to sell. And then once you have equaled your income or equaled the amount of money that you feel that you need, then it's time to pull the plug. So is that what you did?
Well, I don't know that I was ever going to equal what I was doing. But at that point in life, it had become a situation where I kind of sensed that I would be okay. I wouldn't be starving to death, and I wouldn't be in a situation where I couldn't pay my rent. I was a little older when I made the transformation, so
Right.
and I knew I was going to give up a lot of money for a period of time, and probably maybe even the rest of my life. But it was just one of those things where meaning took over, and but I knew I would be okay. I'm not an extravagant person, so I don't need to live extravagantly. And so anyway, that it was just I had to make a choice for my own happiness.
Well, I remember you telling me about your process, and I found it to be interesting because you managed to ramp up what appeared to me to be very rapidly. Usually what happens is some of us decide we want to learn to paint, and we kind of mess around with it for a while, and we make a little progress. We take some classes, we do this and that, and we kind of don't get there very rapidly. And you managed to ramp up in my mind, very rapidly through some of the steps. You want to tell us about what you did?
Yeah, I think the first thing that I determined was it really going to be? I had to make a step somewhere, so I had to first determine how meaningful was art. And when I realized that art elevates life, and that I even had a theologian tell me it can actually save you, and there's a sacredness to it. So there was enough meaning there for me to start going like this. My thing was, how quickly can I get there? And I was ready to move. So what I did was I sought out and took a lot of workshops, but I saw, by that time I was pretty good at finding, like, say, I painted with another individual who was a great guy out of Atlanta, Georgia, named Damon Carter. And then I would go to workshops, and I would just keep going and keep working on it. And it's one of those things where I was so excited about it because it was new. It was very new. It was fresh. And I would stay with it. And I'm an 80-20 guy. So I'm not going to work 12 hours a day painting. It's too hard. It's too hard to work. And even now. So what I did was I just found the right workshops to go to. I did reading. I watched DVDs, and I just kept. And I wasn't afraid of being criticized and putting my work out there because I felt that was the fastest way to learn. So I think, if you're going to learn something, you have to get out there. You have to find the right the teachers that actually care. There's plenty of people out there where it's all about them. But I found situations where people care about how I was doing, and I just stayed with it. But I think one of the first things to do is just lose your ego. Be humble and get out there and find supportive people, and you can really go. I was very fortunate that as a result of that, and I never shied down from it. I would enter, because I wanted to judge myself. So I would enter the big national contest and go from there. And I got fortunate. I won a couple of nice big landscape awards early on, and it kept kind of propelled me, and then I ended up in a good situation.
Let's talk about that for a second, because I think that's an important distinction. You said something that I want to probe. You said you wanted to challenge yourself when you entered these competitions. Is that right?
Yeah. It's interesting to me, and this is one of those scenarios where you look around and you start to feel it, and George Carlson said it at the PleinAir convention. He said he had to reinvent himself every 10 years. Um, you can get stale. In other words, you can get in a situation where you picked up enough tools and you can repeat your process over and over and over again, and you get stale. And to find your own authentic voice, you have to be willing to step out there, challenge yourself, stay fresh, and be just trying to get. You can't start being safe because you'll get bored. I like the way David Bowie described it. He said, he goes, your feet really shouldn't be touching the ground when you're in the creative process.
Nor did they ever.
No, that's true of him. And you see it today. You see people where you can go, and, you can sit in your studio and go, well, I'm going to do this or do that or whatever. But the real key is you've got to live a life. You've got to get out there. You've got to try new things. You got to play with your tools, and it doesn't ever stop.
Yeah, I have encountered people who are stuck, but they don't know they're stuck, and they're happy where they are. So I guess to them they're not stuck, but they are not growing. And I think the process has got to be about constant, continual growth, because first off, you don't want to get bored. Absolutely not.
Well, and the hard part's this. You go, well, I used to always say, keep the motivation and those ahead of the work, and you'll always paint, because you run into people that they go, I quit painting, or I can't do this. And my question, because I teach a lot of workshops, is why? Why do you do that? And I think the answer becomes, one, they don't, if you're around teachers that won't explain it simply and concisely, and you don't understand what you're doing, you just won't keep going. So you've got to have a lot of support, be around the right people, I think, and they'll help you get there. And I think it's just one of those things where even older artists that have been around for a long time, and I've probably hit right around that 10 to 12 year period. So I've kind of been in a slump, kind of going, how do I now reinvent what I do? And it's been an interesting read to figure that out, because it's all about freshness. How do you stay fresh? And painting more than one painting at a time, having 4 to 5, and then taking that painting and painting it to a level you painted at before, and then trying to go, okay, now I want to take it farther. How does it go from an ordinary painting to an extraordinary painting? How do I do those type things once you've figured out all the tools?
So there's a concept called thresholding, and I'm sure that it's probably been around forever, but the idea is that you push yourself to the point of complete discomfort, and you obligate yourself to that point of discomfort. So to give you a scenario about this, is the person who told me about it said that he wanted to be the guy that lived in a multi-million-dollar house, but he lived in a crummy apartment. And so he figured out a way to buy his first house at, $250,000, and it was a real stretch for him, but he was obligated to it, and he managed to do it. And then once he was in that, then he pushed himself to get to a $500,000 house, and same thing, he stretched, but then he became comfortable in the $500,000 zone, and then the $1 million zone, and then so on. So I think that, even though this isn't about financial, although it certainly could be for an artist, it's about really putting yourself into an area of discomfort so that you can accept it and allow yourself to be there, to live there, and then move yourself to the next level after that. Yes or no?
Yeah, that's exactly it. And I think it's, you have these fears, and you go, well, I'm okay where I am, but how do you get comfortable being uncomfortable? I think if you can get to that level, then it doesn't bother you. And I think when you're first starting, like when I was first starting, nobody expected anything of me. So there was really no uncomfortableness at all. I had lost all ego. I didn't care. And then eventually you reach a point where people expect certain things from you, and your galleries expect, you've got these really good galleries, and then you're going to teach these workshops, and people kind of expect you to kind of know what you're doing. And so you tend to settle back in, and you're not out there pushing yourself as much. So yeah, and it's so easy to get, and then you start getting bored, and then you stop painting. And I talk to many a person who's been painting their whole life, 25, 30 years, and they go, oh, that's why it was interesting to me to hear George Carlson. And the funny thing is, they'll tell you, stretch yourself, and then you'll go, wow, maybe you should look at re-stretch yourself too. So it's, and the funny thing is, it's not caused by staying in your studio and do it. I mean, you have to kind of get out and explore and live. And to me, that word curiosity probably, get curious about everything. You can very easily slide into this art world and it become all about the same type paintings, and you see the same thing, and you see this and you see that. And it could be just like a law career. It could start to get boring again. So you just have to really, I think, a curiosity, looking at things, moving, traveling. Don't be afraid to try new tools. Go take a workshop, do something differently. Everything I read tends to indicate it's not about holding yourself up in your studio. It's about exploring, getting more curious, doing things like that. I just read a great book by somebody who was a great writer, and he'd written, and I think everybody reaches this no matter where they are. And so you have to reinvent yourself and go back. How do I become authentic again? And how do I keep that freshness? How do I get something fresh going on? It's and how do I stay happy? One of those things, like when I was a lawyer, it became about money. So you start reaching these extrinsic goals, and all the books now say that it's not the external goals, it's these intrinsic goals that's what keeps you happy. How do I please myself in the painting? How do I make sure I love the painting no matter what anybody else thinks about it? Have I pushed myself to a new level? So working on those type things versus I'm going to have $1 million in sales, or I'm going to be in 3 galleries, it shifts the goal setting. And from what I understand, the only way to sustain your happiness is to be reaching these type intrinsic goals, not external goals, but intrinsic goals where you're happy with yourself and you're happy with your own art and you're pushing yourself to new levels, and things then tend to change for you. Now
a lot of people will chase goals and get to those goals and realize those goals don't make them happy. And they're usually financially driven or material goals. So I think you're right about the intrinsic value that you find in various things, because the reality is that those things typically don't change anything. You can work them to your benefit, but you're still going to be, if you're naturally unhappy, you're still going to be unhappy when, whether you have where you are today or you have unlimited amounts of whatever, you're still going to find you're unhappy unless you've got something else that's driving it.
Yeah, that totally makes sense, because I always love this statement, what was the line? You take yourself wherever you go. So, people go, well, if I go on this great trip and I'm over there, I'm going to be happy. And you go, well, you're just going to be in a different situation looking at it from your same perspective. So I've always loved that line. It's interesting, and it's interesting now, I guess that what they're doing is they're getting scientific studies, and they're being able to dwell into this psychology a lot better, that actually happier people succeed more than unhappy people. And if you really think about it, and so the theory is get happy first, and then everything else will start to fall in line.
Yeah. So how do you define it?
I think that becomes your own intrinsic thing. I mean, it's funny. From what I understand from the reading, there's pleasure and comfort, and those are nice. But pursuing an intrinsic goal and going after it and seeing progress along the way is the only way to sustain that type happiness. Other than that, it's like your guy in the big house. Once he gets the big house and it's paid for, then all of a sudden, that's it. He's no longer happy anymore. He's got to do something else.
Right.
And I guess that's probably what happens when, if you get to your certain any extrinsic goal, and I know this to be true. I mean, nothing's 100%. So let's say your intrinsic goal is to create better art, but there still will be some financial motivation in it. It just won't be the primary driving force.
So you're a guy who probably made a lot of money as an attorney. I don't know what your life was like, but I would imagine it was probably pretty stressful. You made the switch. You became a full-time artist. You're now working what I would call the circuit, right? You're going around and doing some of the shows. You're doing gallery shows. You're painting for a living. You're traveling. How is it?
Well, I don't do as many of the PleinAir events as a lot of people. I probably only have done maybe one or two the past few years. I do one because I love it, and that's the Rocky Mountain PleinAir Painters, because we're painting in Jackson Hole. It's run by artists. It's not all about. And then I've done Laguna a couple of times, and most of the others I just don't do. You'll get invited to them, but I prefer to. I've got 2 to 3 super galleries I love, and I keep it very limited. And then I prefer to teach about 8 workshops a year. And some of them are very nice. We have a good group that'll go to Italy, usually in June, and those are really first class done trips. So I've had a lot people that I go back and I teach workshops, and they'll take them over and over. And I did the same thing. Once I found somebody that I cared about, or that I knew cared about teaching or something like that, I'd latch hold of them. And I'm a big believer in word of mouth. If you talk to somebody who's been to something of somebody's done, that's the best thing. I'm not a big believer in just because their name's plastered all over everywhere, that's going to be the best person to work with. So, and that's kind of how the legal business was. It was all word of mouth. Things change a little bit, but you got to be out there some. So I'm not.
So you never answered my question.
Oh. I'm sorry. That's the question.
No, that's all right. So the question is, you had this stressful job. You were making great money. You had this dream of becoming an artist, making your living as an artist. How is it? Are you glad you did it? Was it the right thing to do?
Absolutely. It has so much more meaning. And it's funny, people always look at their past and go, why did I do that? And it's really an interesting thing. I went, why was I a lawyer ahead of time? And it became real clear when I started teaching workshops. When we tried cases, they used to say you have to bring them down to a 6th grade level, and you used to take very complex matters and try to simplify it. So teaching, when I was painting and teaching a workshop, it was easy for me to talk and at the same time to take complicated matters and simplify them. And so it became easy for me to teach. It was very comfortable. It was just like sliding a glove on. And I think it was all related to that. And is it more rewarding? Well, it is to me. If you have 15 people in a workshop and you watch them get as excited as you got when you were learning, that's very rewarding. It's very meaningful, and you can follow them throughout their career and just watch them keep getting better and better. And it's just a more meaningful type relationship to me than being involved in big money fighting cases and people fighting overall. Plus it's a more peaceful environment.
So your best advice to somebody who's listening to this now, who is in a position, maybe a low-paying position, maybe a high-paying position, they're doing something that they started out loving, but maybe they don't love it so much anymore. Your best advice to them is?
Seek out the best education and learning you can get from actual teachers that care and can explain things, and then lose whatever ego you have and just keep learning. DVDs, everything.
You have a DVD out. I know that because we produced it.
Yeah. And, it was interesting because I spent a lot of time talking during the DVD. And fortunately, I've gotten really good feedback from and you get, the nice thing about artists is a lot of them are grateful. So you'll get these really nice emails back going, boy, I really like the way you explained that. You took your time, but it was clear and concise. So it's, being around, if you get around supportive and grateful people, and that people think in terms of abundance, I think it just helps your career take off. It's really hard to sit in your studio and be a loner and then move up to high levels, I think.
So is that why you do a lot of plein air painting then? Is that you would rather be out with other people, out with nature?
Yeah, my passions, I enjoy being outside, and I like the idea of the immediacy, and there's one thing about that. That's always going to stretch you. Painting from life, outdoors, looking at things and having a couple of hours to do it, because they're not always going to work out. So that's about as close to what David Bowie's talking about. Your feet aren't on the ground a lot of times out there. Even if you're doing one of the big competitions and you have to paint for a week, there's going to be several of those paintings that aren't going to make it. So, if they're all making it, you're not pushing yourself enough and trying new things, and you're just staying in your little comfort zone. And, then it becomes stale and boring. So
how do you define a really great painting? You walk into an art gallery or a museum and something clobbers you over the head. What is it about a great painting that's different from an average painting?
This is an interesting thing, because you'll see all kinds everywhere. But I would say one of the most immediate things to me is the sense of lighting, and can I feel the warmth in the painting, in the landscape painting? Can I sense it? Can I feel the temperature, the atmosphere? And that's assuming that the shapes are good and the design is good, which was one of the hardest things for me to learn. But it goes to extraordinary when I think there's a capturing that you can't get from a photo of the lighting and the feel of the temperature. That to me is one of the big things. Some people are okay with just good shapes, and I didn't know that people saw shapes before they saw color and lighting. But the lighting and the harmony to me, and then I'm big on brushwork. I love to see exciting paint application, and not everybody's into that. Usually the general public likes to see a little more detailed look. So you've got to find kind of what you like. But if you walk in, and I've done this in the Booth Museum up in Cartersville, Georgia, where we taught some workshops. Yeah, there's a whole bunch of big time Western paintings with cowboys and Indians. But if you go in, you can see exactly why a Howard Turkney painting holds together, because all the values are simplified and it's not real complex. So when you look at a painting and it's simplified in value, you can see it from across the room. It's not too complicated. So you know right where your eye's supposed to go. You know right where everything is. And then at the same time, it draws you in and keeps you interested throughout the painting. But it has to be simplified from a distance. And I think that was the hardest thing to learn. It's an interesting thing to me. Like, I learned little tricks, like with shapes. People will go, well, how come these clouds don't work? Or what's wrong with this rock pile? And a lot of times if you put one big shape in there, it'll help that whole thing work. So it's just a design element, like being in a living room. If you don't have the couch in there, then the room doesn't look right. If there's like 10 little chairs, and that's such a simplified explanation, but it's so true. It's just so true to everything.
You said something else about, you said that one of the things that you really had to work on was design. What other elements about design are important, and can you share them without demonstrating it on video or being able to draw it? So can you explain what good design is with your voice?
I'll try. I think the best way to say it is the big shapes lead you around the painting beautifully and take you to the spot where you really want to go. And then there'll be other little areas of interest. There's usually a primary focal point that this is where my eye's supposed to go. And then I can wander to other places. Now, the thing about design that's so interesting is it has a unity to it, then it works. If it's too complicated or too scattered, you won't get a sense of where your eye is supposed to go. And then when you start to throw in angles and those type things, it's a full-time job. You could take a rock pile and redesign them 100 times, and maybe 3 of those will be really super designs, but you could stay in it forever. So it's always interesting to me how people handle shapes and designs. Angles become really important. It's interesting. You can keep studying paintings, and it never, that look at the design, never. I mean, you just have to keep looking at it. You have to have it, especially in a landscape. You need strong foreground, midgrounds, and backgrounds. And you need overlapping. That Carlson book's pretty good on design, things like that. Payne, Edgar Payne talked about some of those things, but it never goes away. And I think one of the great things is, and I've always said this, if you can never see enough really good artists finish a painting. I mean, I've probably seen thousands of times good artists finish paintings, and I hope to see another 100,000, because you learn something every time you watch somebody really, really good finish a painting, especially if they can explain why they did it. And that to me is the big, the explanation of why helps you to repeat the process. So I'm always big on, if you're going to demo, please talk or explain what's going on, even if you had to do it later on. So it's interesting. Design's tough. That's one of those things you can study the rest of your life. And some people are really, really good at it. But for most people, that's probably one of the biggest struggles.
Yep. I know I struggle with that. That's for sure. So what do you think? You've been at this art thing now for how long? 10 years?
Yeah, just a little over that probably. I'm not good with my time, but a little over that, I guess.
So what is the big goal? Is there one? Is there something that you really want to achieve with your art that you're kind of looking forward to figuring out?
Yeah. This, now I think I'm in that reinvention stage where I want it to keep getting fresher and stay fresher. And at this point, I also want to be able to explain how people can do it easier. In other words, it's an obtuse process, but the more I learn, the easier it gets to explain, and the more I want to be able to explain it so that other people can pick up on it and move, so that it's not so strange and so obtuse and so weird. Even in the workshops, when we do I'll talk about abstract design, and you'll talk about, for instance, if a mid value takes up 60 to 70% of the painting, and then maybe a darker value, another 20%, and then maybe a lighter value, another 10, those type of ratios on abstract design really affect paintings. So it's kind of interesting. Nothing ever gets balanced, and that keeps the painting interesting. But just playing with those underneath every good realistic painting is a strong abstract design. So it's always, to me, learning those things and being able to explain them. I think it helps other people learn them. And it's a big deal because you won't know it at first. You'll just be wandering around. You'll see somebody paint a painting and you'll go, it looks great. Why? How do you get to the why of it?
Well, so you take those big basic shapes and you remove all the detail, and it still makes a pretty great painting. Right. And then have you ever noticed how if you took a really, really good painting and you copied it, how much the big shapes will hold together, but how much variety in the other shapes and angles there would be. Nothing would ever look uniform, square, circular. The shapes would be so interesting that the interest alone in the shapes would draw you in. So those type things, and seeing them and getting the why is one thing. Then being able to repeat the process is a whole nother step. And that's where I think workshops come in and people walking by going, change that shape, watch that value. And then lastly, you get to edges and those other really exciting things that just make it more interesting. The great thing is you never get there. That's pretty unusual. Usually people say the great thing is when you arrive.
I think if you arrive, you're going to be stale. It's like your guy with the big house. He gets to the $1 million house, and your key is how do you stay fresh? I mean, you could play with your shapes and play with brushwork and play with paint application. And it's real interesting to me. If you're teaching a workshop, you can walk up and you can tell immediately where somebody got lost in their brain and started fudging around hoping it would come out. And you can tell exactly where somebody knew exactly what they were doing. So it's quite interesting to see that type of scenario and how much a painting really tells about how the person felt when they were painting the painting. It's an exciting process.
So we have just a few minutes left, and I want to make sure that I honor you first off for what you've done and the fantastic painter that you've become. Also, what I like about being around you is that you're just a great guy to be around. You don't take life too seriously, or if you do, you don't show it. And you seem to want to lift other people up, and that's a real nice gift that you have. So thank you for that. What are the things that perhaps would be on your mind to talk about today that I haven't touched on? Nothing comes to mind, huh?
No, I mean, it's all about, I guess if you're going to live a life of abundance and don't crank down on yourself and try to find, if you start playing with your own voice and figuring out how you want things to look yourself, life gets magical. Painting gets magical. And that's the realm you want to stay in, but you can't you can't stay in a safety zone and stay in that magic because it's not as fresh. And some things will happen. Now look, it's like when I used to go to a place and it would always look beautiful the first 2 times, and then the third time somebody would say, "Have you seen the dirt yet?" And I go, "Well, yeah, I finally." So when it's fresh and new, it's all great. But this industry is like any other industry. There's nepotism. There's all kinds of, you'll see partisanship. You'll see things like that. That's why your goals need to be intrinsic, because, you're going to have a painting and it's going to be hanging there. Everybody else is going to walk up to you and go, "That's the best painting in the show," but it's not going to win an award. And so you could get very easily disheartened if you're paying attention to what's going on externally. Um, I mean, you may hit a couple of lucky times. I felt fortunate the first couple of times. I got some awards from people I didn't even know who they were, and then other times I've seen somebody get an award in a big show because they lived in the same city and they were, so you can't be looking at that stuff. It's very easy. It can distract you, and you can't ever have any excuses. In other words, the market's not good. I'm not, I need to be painting cowboys and Indians, or I need to do that. Never works. It's you make your market by painting great paintings, and don't let anybody sidetrack you by saying, "Oh, the art world's coming to an end. Oh, there's no market over here." Next thing you know, there'll be somebody in that market selling really well or doing really well. It's all about you get out there and do it, because it becomes a crutch. It's very easy to say, "Well, I didn't make it because, the market just."
You gave yourself an excuse. You gave yourself an out, which is human nature, of course. Yeah, you have to, you have to manage your brain constantly. You have to manage your attitude constantly, because all of those excuses are not always true. And there always will be evidence. Insight Gallery was launched in 2008 when everybody else was crashing. They launched the gallery and they did really, really great. And they used it as an opportunity, knowing that nobody else was going to be promoting themselves, and they became huge overnight. So I think that kind of thinking is deadly. We do have to manage that. So let me ask you the final days kind of question. So you've got your last day on Earth. You've been given notice. It's your last day on Earth, but you're still healthy. You can go anywhere in the world and paint. Where's that one last painting going to be? Can you describe it for me?
My head. I'll always go with what's right off the top of my head. Probably jump in my car and run up into the Tetons and paint them one last time. It's unfortunate to be in a great gallery that's in that town called Legacy Gallery, and they did the same thing you're talking about. They put their flagpole in the ground and they said, "We're going to stay representational art. This is who we are." Boom, boom, boom. As a result of that, they're a huge success.
Yeah.
And so my guess is I'd run up there and try to paint one of the best mountain pieces I've ever painted if I could.
As a painter, one thing we have to do is we have to follow our hearts. And I know painters who started chasing the Western thing because everybody else was making a lot of money in the Western thing, but they didn't really like doing it. They just did it because they thought they'd make money on it, and they didn't do a good job. Because right. It came through. It's just your art is an extension of your heart. That's why your heart has the word art in it, I guess, huh?
That's good.
Hey, so this is the other final morbid question. It's your last day on Earth. All of the paintings that you've created no longer exist. There's no record of you anywhere around, and you have just your closest friends and family gathered around you, and you're able to impart a couple of pieces of wisdom on them, 2 or 3 pieces of wisdom. It can be about art, can be about life, it can be about anything. What would you say?
The first thing out of my mouth would be live with passion, and be grateful. and work on your happiness. It's not about what happened externally. I mean, somebody gave me a great line one time. A really close friend of mine died, and they said it's just their body. Their spirit lives on, and it lives on in you. So whatever you've done to help other people get, if people are around you and they sense a spirit and a passion for life and that you're alive, I love that line. Don't ask what you can do. Ask what makes you feel alive. That's the ticket. I think that what makes you, and this is really one of the hardest things to do. Sit down and write down what really, really, really makes me feel alive and what really, really, really makes me happy. And you'll be surprised how much you go, well, I work this and I've got to do that and I've got to do that. And you're not really aware of what's really driving your most passionate moments in life.
What a great way to end. Thank you, Bill Davidson.
Thank you, Eric. I appreciate it. It's always great.
Well, thanks again to Bill Davidson. Bill is an amazing painter and has become a good friend, and I really appreciate what he's doing in his teaching style is wonderful. This is sponsored by the PleinAir Convention. I think Bill's going to be there, actually. Held this April in San Diego with some of the most amazing artists in the world as faculty to teach you. Whether you're a brand new baby plein air painter, just beginning to paint, or an experienced pro, this is an amazing event and everybody's welcome. And we have a place to help even the people who are very early stage. Don't feel bad about it. We've all been there. We go outdoors to paint together every day. We have instruction indoors in 4 giant stages with big screens so you can see every brush stroke, and a giant expo hall of goodies and art supplies. So much more. Learn more at PleinAirConvention.com. Today's interview is also sponsored by the PleinAir Salon Art Competition. You can win $15,000 cash and the cover of PleinAir magazine. Lots of exposure, great way to launch a career, plus lots of other cash prizes in the bi-monthly and the annual competition. And this is the very last chance to get your paintings in before the final judging. So make sure you get that done. You'll be seen by top judges, and there's about 20 categories, so you have lots of chances to win. And it's not just plein air, but studio paintings as well. Enter at PleinAirSalon.com. Well, thank you so much for being here. The plein air movement is hot, and that may be why plein air is the top-selling representational art magazine sold at Barnes & Noble nationwide. Drop by, pick one up, or get a bi-monthly subscription for half the newsstand price. And let's do this again sometime like next week. We'll see you then. I am Eric Rhoads, publisher and founder of PleinAir Magazine. Remember, it's a big world out there. Please go out and paint it. We'll see you. Goodbye.